Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give a few seconds for everybody to log in and be ready, and we'll start right away.
Morning.
Good morning, Dr. Wise.
Welcome, everybody. I was just teaching about the dangers of nicotine yesterday in one of my classes, so this is a very timely topic.
Yes, definitely. Okay, I think we're getting more participants. So as we get participants again, welcome to the next edition of the Lunch and Learn webinars from the home visiting work group from the Florida Asthma Coalition. My name is Wanda Rodriguez Dunham, and I am the asthma program manager for Florida Department of Health, and also one of the chairs of the home visiting work group. And with us also is Dr. Deborah Weiss, who is the co-chair of the home visiting work group. As we all know, we offer these webinars the last Thursday of the month. Last month, we had to postpone this one because there's some Hurricane Ian that came and disrupted our lives, and is still disrupting our lives. So our thoughts and prayer are with the people affected and still going through the issues of recovering from the damage of the hurricane. But here we are today, and again, welcome. And we're going to welcome today Mr. Eliseo Rangel. Eliseo Rangel is a graduate of Florida Atlantic University with a degree of social work. He obtained his master's social work degree from Florida Gulf Coast University and has been working in the field of nicotine addiction for the past 14 years. He is a certified tobacco treatment specialist in the state of Florida and currently is in the process of acquiring the national certification. He believes in the importance of educating people and removing many of the misconceptions associated with tobacco, nicotine use, and prevent individuals from addressing their dependence to nicotine. So this presentation we're going to have around 10 minutes for a Q&A session. So if you want to write your questions and leave it there, we have our amazing staff from the Health Council Southeast Florida, Shelby and Caitlin, that will be monitoring the chat if you have any questions that needs to be addressed. So again, thank you for coming, and Mr. Eliseo Rangel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this very important topic. It is my pleasure to be here. And hopefully I'm able to share some information that you find useful when either working with individuals in the community or for people that you might know. This is part of the new reality that we're facing when it comes to the use of nicotine and nicotine dependence, the availability of electronic devices. So we're going to be talking about the impact that these devices are having in our society. And like I said, this is something that we're going to be dealing with moving forward. There's no going back to the old days of just combustible tobacco products. And as you will see, there is a tremendous impact that these devices are having on society. And this is just the beginning. Unfortunately, we still don't have a robust amount of information in terms of the general impact that they have, but based on the information that we have there, everything's pointing to the fact that just because they're not, you're not burning tobacco, you're not putting carbon monoxide or 7,000 chemicals in your system, it does not mean that they're not harming your body in some way, shape, or form. Like Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, I've been working in the field of tobacco cessation for 14 years. So I came into this field right around the time that these devices became available. So I started looking into them, and as a potential, for helping individuals dealing with nicotine dependence. And unfortunately, what I found was that, if anything, these devices were complicating things much more than they were helping, and the lack of action in some instances from individuals and also organizations at the national level have made things much more complicated. I'm very critical, and I don't hold back. And these are just my personal views, but I'm very critical of organizations that did not act soon enough to put an end to this or to regulate it to some extent. And that is part of the reason why we find ourselves where we are now. So we're going to talk briefly just about the impact of tobacco use. We're going to discuss nicotine addiction and electronic devices. And we're also just briefly going to touch on new products, types of nicotine, and their impact on cessation. Simply put, I mean, we all know that tobacco use is not good for us. That is harmful. Every tobacco user knows that. Every nicotine user knows that. Tobacco use kills more people than alcohol, AIDS, cocaine, heroin, homicide, suicide, motor vehicle crashes combined. Okay, we're talking about 480,000 people each year just in the United States alone that die from tobacco-related illnesses. So we have a combination of factors here that contributes to the increase in popularity of devices. We have an issue in terms of the lack of regulation, and then you have a component where people in essence are desperate. Tobacco users are desperate to eliminate the dependence to nicotine, so they search for options. And then you have an issue in terms of initiation. You have young people that never would have touched a conventional tobacco product had it not been for electronic devices. So it's almost like the perfect storm, if you will. Every part of the body is impacted by tobacco use. For the most part, when we offer services to individuals that are dealing with nicotine dependence, we don't really spend a lot of time talking about the impact of tobacco on the body because people know that is not good for them. They are already dealing with the consequences. So we rather focus on things that the individuals can do to help themselves overcome their dependence. It is important to understand that there is a real impact in terms of utilization of electronic devices, even though obviously the manufacturers, the people selling the products, want to downplay the issue. One of the things that I will also encourage people to do is to avoid comparing the two. Avoid trying to compare tobacco products to electronic devices. It would be like comparing apples to oranges. They're two different things. They're both just delivery devices that the sole purpose is to deliver nicotine to the body. But obviously, as far as the impact, we're still in the early stages when it comes to electronic devices. So we don't want to really compare both of those things. And one of the things we have to be aware of is the fact that the landscape is changing right before us. Things are constantly moving when it comes to electronic devices, so we have to be diligent in making sure that we are paying attention to what is happening and what is the potential impact that those changes are having on our society. One of the reasons I included definition here for addiction is because, unfortunately, when it comes to tobacco use, when it comes to nicotine use, for the most part, society in general does not necessarily view this particular substance the same way that it might see other substances like cocaine, heroin, or any other hardcore drugs. So it is important to understand that we are dealing with a dependence. We are dealing with individuals that have a severe dependence to a substance that is connected to everything that they do on a regular basis. So it's very, very important to understand that there's really no safe amount of use when it comes to nicotine. And that includes whether it's combustible products, whether it's nicotine pouches, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's electronic devices. There's really no safe amount because you are going to develop a certain level of dependence. One of the things that is important to look at is, again, our attitudes. How do we feel about addressing tobacco use? How do we feel about the impact that nicotine has on society? And one of the exercises that I ask people to do when we do these presentations, and usually this works better when we're in person, but obviously we don't have that option here. I would ask you to take a couple of seconds and just create a mental image in your head as far as what does what comes to mind when you think of addiction? Well, um, what does the person look like? If I were to ask you to describe what does a person look like that is dependent to a particular substance, I'll be curious to know what are some of those images, what are some of those things that come to mind when you think about, those individuals. And most important, also, and this is one of those moments where the slides are, acting up slightly. What are some of the potential consequences? When thinking in terms of addiction, what does the person look like, and what are some potential consequences that the person might encounter as a result of the use of the particular substance? Okay. So then the next question, are those thoughts similar when thinking of a nicotine user? And chances are that is not the case. When I talk to people as far as, describing an addict, usually, they paint a very, drastic image, in terms of the appearance, the way that the person is carrying themselves. Maybe they're struggling with withdrawal. They're very aggressive. They're not well kept. I mean, there's very, very drastic images that come to mind when people think in terms of addiction. But those things do not translate when talking, about nicotine users. Okay, and that seems to be a major problem, especially now with electronic devices, because there's a certain level of normalization that has taken place. Tobacco users, yeah, they're not good. They're hurting themselves. E-cigarette use is almost like a cool thing to do. Again, it's just like, you're with the times. You have your cell phone on one hand, and then you have an electronic device on the other. I'm not going to talk about cell phone addiction. That's a whole another topic, but there's plenty of evidence for that as well. So society does not see nicotine use as an addiction for the most part. And I always mention the fact that, having worked as many years as I have in this field, one of the toughest parts for me to deal with is actually working with providers, because in many cases, their attitude towards, how they address, the issue with their patients is such that they leave the responsibility and the decision and the choice to do something to address the dependence to nicotine up to the individual. And when you're talking about a smoker, again, most of them don't see themselves as addicts. So they're less likely to act to address their dependence because, again, the doctors are not really pushing for it in some cases. They tell them that it's not good for them, that they're hurting themselves. So that's as far as they go. So if there's anything you learn from the presentation today, is the fact that, this is not a bad habit. This is a severe dependence connected to everything that people do on a daily basis. We're talking about a physical dependence. We're talking about a psychological and a social, dependence that is supported by our attitudes and our views in many instances. Tobacco use is part of the identity, and not using tobacco and nicotine amounts to losing part of themselves. So when you are talking to a tobacco user, when you're talking to a nicotine user, they get very defensive because you are telling them to stop doing something that they've been doing for many, many years. And in many cases, they don't feel that is the right time, the right approach. They're not ready, they're not strong enough, or whatever other, rationalization that might come to mind to justify why they shouldn't have to address the issue right now. And this is just an image that shows that, again, everything that people do in many cases, is directly connected to the substance of choice, in this case, nicotine. So why do we consider tobacco use a habit and not addiction? When you look at the history of how tobacco companies operate, they're very good at deceiving people. They're very good at changing the narrative. They're very good at convincing individuals that, well, tobacco use, is just something that people do when they're bored. There's something that people do when they're stressed out. We know for a fact women tend to smoke or start smoking at a certain age because they're concerned about gaining weight, because they hear that, if you smoke, you're less likely, to eat, for example, because nicotine is a hunger suppressant. So, views and ideas that are passed down over time, become, in a sense, the norm, if you will. So it is important to, and again, to point out the fact that tobacco kills more people than every other drug combined, and yet we seem to be much more relaxed about this particular substance than we are about other substances. One of the other things that happens is that we don't have anything that is, in essence, immediate impact to nicotine users. Somebody that is using an electronic device or a cigarette or pouch or pipe or cigar, they know for a fact that when they take a next puff, they're not going to die on the spot from overdose, for example. One of the main things that I always point out when it comes to addiction is that, a cocaine addict, a heroin addict, for the most part, they didn't stop using the substance of choice because they felt ready at some point. They encountered a situation where, like, you know what, I need to stop using. For the most part, many of those individuals that stopped the use of those substances was because they actually encounter a negative consequence as a result of their substance of choice. In this case, let's say cocaine. I have many people that have come through over the years through my classes that say, you know what, I used to use every drug known to man. And if those drugs were available the way that nicotine is available, over the counter, legal, acceptable, I never would have, become clean or sober. So it's very, very important to pay attention to how our attitudes as a society can have an impact in terms of, what people do for themselves. And again, tobacco, nicotine is connected to everything people do. Okay, whether they're driving, cup of coffee, stress, anxiety, frustration, boredom, you name it. It gets the job done. And when somebody comes to you and says, you know what, I just enjoy it. Good. Okay. But just because you enjoy it doesn't mean that you need to do it. How can I help? How can I assist you? How can I refer you to somebody that can help you? And that's one of the things that also happens with nicotine dependence. Drug addicts, for the most part, individuals with substance use disorders, for the most part, if they go to a professional, if they come across a doctor or nurse or anybody that is in the field of healthcare, they're more likely to get referred to a service because people understand the importance of support, the importance of help. When it comes to nicotine, for the most part, what you hear is like, oh, you need to stop smoking. That's not good for you. You need to stop using your electronic devices. That's not good for you. Or in some cases, actually, doctors will say, you know what, and this happened, a lot, a few years ago, where doctors were actually recommending people switch from conventional cigarettes to electronic devices because of the notion that they were safer. So it's very, very important to pay attention to how we approach these things. This year, I put this slide in just to point out the fact that, again, the FDA is proposing a rule to reduce the addictiveness of cigarettes. We have known for the longest time, for years and years, of the fact that, if we reduce the amount of nicotine in tobacco products and and delivery devices, you're going to, in essence, make them less, addictive because they're not supplying the amount of nicotine necessary for there to be a response from your brain. So, I just figured it would be, it was an ideal spot to place this in. So this is something that is under review. They're going to explore these options. Just having worked as long as I have in this field and understanding and knowing how tobacco companies work, this is not something that is just going to get passed and accepted. It's going to be fought and delayed as much as possible. And even if the tobacco companies, fail at the end to stop the FDA or any other entity from making changes, they'll have some other solution for available to them. Just like e-cigarettes kind of just fell in their lap. The rate of initiation in this country was very low with youth, and all of a sudden electronic devices came into the market, and also you have a whole new generation of young individuals dependent on a substance, and in many cases they never even touched a cigarette, and they're just getting the nicotine from their electronic devices. So we're going to talk briefly about electronic devices. They're known as electronic nicotine delivery systems or electronic nicotine delivery devices. We're going to talk about the components. They're pretty much similar across the board. There are certain what you would call generations as far as the different types of products that came into the market years ago and what we have available now. And there's hundreds of brands. I mean, I put 400 brands, but there's literally thousands of products available in the market that meet this criteria. As far as the components, they're pretty similar. Even if the appearance of the device changes, the technology is pretty much the same. You have a battery, which is an energy source. You have an atomizer, and then you have a cartridge that contains the liquid. The person, sucks through the mouthpiece, causing the liquid to evaporate. They inhale it, and you have your fix, if you will. So that's technically just the technology. And this is kind of the evolution of the devices. We go from what you would call the Cigalikes. This will be considered on the far left. This will be considered the first generation devices. Then you move into the vape pens here on the what you would consider the second generation, and then you get over here to the fancy mods. Now the modifiers are very, very effective in terms of the delivery of the nicotine. The only problem is that these devices tend to be more popular with like younger individuals, like 20-something-year-olds, not necessarily young kids or even long-term smokers, because of the fact that they are much more complex, and also they're much more expensive. So it's much easier for a teenager to get their hands on, let's say, a puff bar or a Juul that costs, let's say, $20 versus a mod that can go up to $150 to $200. They're very sophisticated devices, and these were the only products that were available that were actually consistent in the delivery of the nicotine. So again, this is kind of the progression, if you will. If you see here at the bottom left, you got what you call the Cigalike, the vape pen, you got the box, the mods, and then you got the vape pod. The pods, they were actually introduced by a product called Juul. Juul is literally the one that set the tone and literally revolutionized the industry, now for the better, because it has, at this point, we can literally blame Juul for the epidemic that was caused, in this country as the uptake of electronic device use among youth. And this was, the FDA came down and said, we have a problem back in 2018. So they actually are the ones responsible for creating the problem. They introduced a new form of nicotine called nicotine salts, which makes it much more efficient and effective in delivering the nicotine. One of the things that we need to know as far as electronic devices are concerned, they have never been intended as a cessation device. Okay, again, people that use these devices have been told that they are, safer, better, and in many cases, that's what people in society have heard, and that's all. They've only heard one side of the story. They haven't heard anything or anybody pushing against it, and unfortunately, this has been going on for 15 years at this point. So it's very important to keep in mind that they were not intended as a cessation device. There's no evidence that shows that they are actually helping people quit smoking. Now, some people would actually argue, well, I know somebody that stopped smoking, because they used the electronic device. I mean, there are some instances where that might happen, but you have to be very deliberate in terms of, actually going through the process of gradually removing the electronic device. For the most part, what happens is that people just replace the device completely, and they just switch from conventional combustible tobacco products to electronic device. Okay. One of the main problems we had early on, in the first 3 generations or a couple of generations, the first and second generation of devices, was the inconsistency of delivery. And this was around the time that a lot of smokers, switched to the electronic device, and they were not very pleased with the product. So in that case, they would just go back to utilizing conventional cigarettes. Nicotine flux is just the rate at how fast does a device actually introduces the nicotine into the system, therefore determining the level of dependence. Dual use, there's actually evidence, that indicates that people, for the most part, either tried the electronic devices and then just went back to conventional cigarettes, or there's plenty of evidence that shows that a large percentage of people, what they started doing was utilizing electronic device, tobacco products where smoking was allowed, for example, at home or in their car or in their particular environment, and they would use electronic devices where places like work or school, doctors or places that had restrictions in terms of smoking. So there's plenty of evidence of that. What happens with that is that all of a sudden you are actually changing the method of delivery. You're increasing the amount of times that you're consuming the nicotine compared to the tobacco products. Also, we have a problem with the rate of initiation. And like I mentioned, the FDA actually declared an epidemic of electronic device use by youth back in 2018. So this is nothing new. This has been going on for a long time. And again, the lack of action from the FDA in terms of regulating products. They had the ability to regulate products back in 2016. For some odd reason, I don't understand why they came out with a plan in 2017 indicating that they were going to follow a certain pattern, of regulation, and they pushed the regulation all the way to 2022. They were actually sued by several organizations, and they lost. They were sued and they lost the lawsuit. They had to push back the regulation 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. So it's just been one thing after another. But up to this point, right now in 2022, there's still thousands of products available in the market that should not be allowed to be sold based on guidelines set forth by the FDA themselves. So they're really getting a lot of pushback from organizations and at the national level, saying that they needed to act faster, and they need to continue to make changes and improve regulation of these devices. And this is just a picture, kind of like mimicking the type of advertisement that you would see back in the 40s and 50s, where doctors would recommend one brand of tobacco products over another. Tobacco companies and manufacturers of these devices are pretty much using the same playbook. They know what works. They know that they can get their products out to the young people. They're getting their products out there to the desperate smokers, and they're displaying this, and they're stating that these are safer, that they're better. And therefore, you have people that actually start using them. Before you know it, you have a serious problem in terms of dependence. This slide here, I've been talking about this issue for the last 7 years. I was told not to early on. I was told that I had to wait for the FDA to come down with a ruling. I didn't see that being a feasible thing to do. So therefore, I started talking about it. And I figure if my boss finds out that I'm talking about this issue, then I'll stop. They never found out. I would present as a concerned individual. I wasn't really presenting as representing the institution or anything like that. But this slide here, I've left it alone over the years just to indicate and to show that we have known that these things are not safe for people. I mean, we have a study here going back to 2012, 2013. We have a Surgeon General that in 2012 that came out categorically saying that young people and pregnant women should not be using these devices because they saw that it was causing harm. But yet we were not acting fast enough in terms of regulating these products. We're talking about 2011, 2014. If you see this study here that shows the increase of electronic device use by young people, 9-fold by high schoolers, 6-fold by middle school students. And this was before the Juul came into the market. This was just the first generation, second generation electronic devices that were not very consistent, that were not very appealing, that were not very good at getting the job done. And we still had a substantial number of people and young people starting to use the devices. This study from 2016 that showed that there's actual DNA strand breaks and cell death independent of nicotine in cell lines. One of the main things that I always point out is the fact that just because there's no nicotine, that's one of the biggest arguments from people. Well, it's just water vapor. I said putting water in your lungs is a smart thing to do. Not necessarily, but again, people are not paying attention, and they believe and they buy whatever this company tells them. So you're not doing anything harmful. You're just putting water vapor with some flavoring, and no big deal. But this particular study actually showed that there was actual DNA damage caused by these devices. And this is going back to 2016. So again, nothing new. And I plan to leave this slide here just to kind of drive the message home that this has been a problem, and we have known about this for the longest time, but yet we refuse to act. One of the main things as far as the impact on cessation is the method of delivery. Again, I mentioned before, the fact that people have their device on their hand and they're puffing on that device constantly. And even if there's policies in place where they're not allowed to use these devices at work, or they're not allowed to use these devices in stores or any public areas, they still do it because most people are not going to push back on it. Now, smokers for the most part are not going to light up a cigarette in a shopping center or at a store because they know that that's not allowed. But for the most part, when it comes to electronic devices, there's more of a relaxed attitude towards them. So that just exacerbates the problem. So changing the method of delivery, what that does, it actually causes people to become more dependent on the substance. Tobacco users are very ritualistic in terms of their smoking. They smoke a cigarette before they, as soon as they wake up, after breakfast, on the way to work, okay, after lunch, maybe have a cigarette between lunch and getting off of work, a couple of cigarettes on the way home, and then a cigarette after dinner. You can talk to any smoker and they'll tell you that's pretty much what their day looks like. When it comes to electronic devices, again, they have it on their hand and they're literally puffing constantly over and over and over, consuming large amounts of nicotine that at this point is very, refined to be very addictive, completely different than what people used to consume when it came to tobacco products. There's an actual impact in terms of the psychological, emotional component of dependence, because people think, well, I'm doing something better. I breathe easier, I feel better. Well, yeah, you're not putting carbon monoxide in your system. You're not putting all these chemicals in your system. Your body feels better. You sleep better. You feel much more comfortable, but it doesn't mean that you're not causing harm. Again, like I mentioned before, the whole concept of acceptance and normalization, especially among young people. There was a statistic that I came across years ago that said that 7 out of 10 kids would have never touched a tobacco product, but yet they are using electronic devices and they're heavily addicted to nicotine as a result. So that is very, very concerning. It's almost like we have undone all the progress we had made in terms of eliminating the dependence to nicotine. We have a whole new generation of people that are addicted to nicotine as a result of the electronic devices. This whole concept of harm reduction is something that I encourage everybody to stay away from. This plays into the hands of the manufacturers. It plays into the hands of tobacco companies. If you look at the history of tobacco companies, they have always been in the business of harm reduction. They offer a product with no filters back in the day, 40s, 50s, 30s, you name it. They all of a sudden evidence was so overwhelming that showed that tar was a problem. So what did they do? Oh, well, let's offer you a cigarette with a filter. Okay. Then they decided, well, you know what? Let's offer you some light cigarettes. Oh, well, now we want to offer you electronic devices. They're always in the business of making it seem like they actually care about their consumers, and in reality they don't. All they care about is their money, the bottom line, and all they care about is making profit. If these devices were as effective to help people quit smoking, if they were as good as they themselves, the companies, the manufacturers made it out to be, tobacco companies would have crushed this industry. Okay, but instead they've invested billions and billions of dollars, and they want a piece of the action because they realize that conventional tobacco products are going to disappear. What we know today as cigarettes are not going to be available in the next 10 years or so, because it's all about supply and demand. Smokers are older, they're dying as a result of the tobacco use. And there's not going to be a demand for conventional cigarettes. That's why they now have something called IQOS, which is a heat not burn product. That's why they're investing on electronic devices. That's why they always trying to figure out what other products they can come up with, to keep people addicted to nicotine. It's all about, again, the bottom line. And one of the main problems when it comes to this is that you're not addressing the dependence. All you're doing is you're changing the product from a conventional cigarette to electronic device, and you're not really addressing the addiction part of it. And again, people are less likely to quit. They're using something that works for them, and they don't smell like an ashtray, and they can taste things better. And again, all those things that tend to be a problem for smokers are no longer an issue. But again, the dependence is not being addressed. And this image pretty much summarizes the attitude that most people have in society when it comes to electronic devices. Cigarettes kill, electronic devices don't. Okay, and in reality, that's not the case. Some of the potential hazards when it comes to electronic devices, one of the things that I always point out, less harmful does not equal harmless. Okay, and that's why I always stay away from comparing tobacco products to electronic devices. There's nothing in the market really that is going to kill half of their consumers. There's no legal product sold in anywhere other than cigarettes that will kill 50% of their consumers, and the other 50 are going to live with consequences as a result of the use. So just because something is less harmful does not mean that it's not harming the individual. The whole concept of water vapor versus chemical aerosol. It's not water vapor. It's a chemical aerosol that is consistent of propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, liquid nicotine, and flavoring. And there's actually evidence that shows that flavors themselves, when heated up to extreme temperatures, have the ability to actually harm individuals. Okay. So again, it's you are putting chemicals in your system. Again, they're not at the level that you would consider in terms of tobacco products, but again, they're still putting things in your lungs. One of our most sensitive organs, our lungs, are not designed to put anything other than pure breathable air. Okay, and we know for a fact, evidence shows that there's heavy metals, there's toxicants, carcinogens, and fine particles in this chemical aerosol. And as a matter of fact, the particles are so small when it comes to this particular aerosol that it actually deposits much deeper inside the lungs, therefore causing lung ruptures, and lack of function when it comes to the constant use of these devices. So it's very, very important to pay attention to that. Poisoning was a concern early on with the lack of regulation with the packaging. That's something that has been addressed. Bacteria, I never really thought about that, but it makes sense. I mean, for the most part, a smoker will grab a cigarette, take 10 puffs on it, and then unfortunately throw it out the window of their car. Okay, you see all the cigarette butts all over the place, and that's very disgusting. And that's the impact to our environment is tremendous. But that's a whole new presentation. I'm not going to go there right now. But the bacteria is something that I never really thought of, but it makes sense. Where do we keep our keys, our phones, our wallets, our money? You either have a purse, you put in your pockets, and then you have this device that literally is surrounded by all these different things that we know are with high concentration of bacteria and germs. And then you grab it, you put it in your mouth, take a couple of drags, put it back in the pocket, and then you pull it out again, take a couple of drags, put it back, and then you're constantly doing that. And there's actually a study that I came across that actually showed the impact that this was having in terms of a potential hazard for lung function. And then explosions, I put an asterisk because this was with the first generation, second generation products mainly, and that was because of the lack of regulation and the batteries not being able to function properly. And this chart here just kind of shows the severe problem that was occurring as a result of the poisoning issue. Unfortunately and thankfully, only one child that I know of passed away from ingesting the liquid, the nicotine liquid. But there was a lot of calls to the poison control because the kids were grabbing these bottles that smelled like, I don't know, you name it. And you think of it, and there's a flavor for that. I mean, from cinnamon rolls to strawberry shortcake to, I don't know. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of flavors. So it was very appealing for children. And unfortunately, that has not been much more of an issue at this time. Some of the recommendations that are made regarding the use or the lack of use of the devices, and the slide is acting up again. Okay, there you go. One of the main things, and like I mentioned, 2014, nicotine is toxic to developing fetuses and impairs fetal brain and lung development. This is another reason why the FDA does not allow for the use of patches with pregnant women, because nicotine is a blood constrictor. So a vein constrictor, so it's going to impair the blood flow. So it actually impairs a fetus. Some doctors will recommend some of their patients that are pregnant, that smoke a pack of cigarettes or more, to use something like gum or lozenges, because those are only used sporadically. They're not something like a patch that is constantly releasing nicotine into the system. But that's, again, something that every doctor would have to consider on an individual basis. So these are just some of the other recommendations and concerns as far as the use of electronic devices. Again, adolescent brains still developing, and this is something that is very concerning, especially with the new type of nicotine products that are available in the market, and we're going to talk about that as well. Let's see. Okay. I did mention that there was a possibility for a bit of a lag on some of the slides. Not sure why that is, but it does happen. So this is technically what we would consider the new normal. Okay, it's not uncommon, for us to go out and to maybe a restaurant, or if we go out with friends, or just being, driving in your car and there's a vehicle in front of you and there's a massive cloud coming out from the car. It looks like the car in front of you caught on fire. There's a good possibility that it's just somebody using a modifier or a brand new electronic device that generates a massive cloud. So this is what young people, for the most part, youth, are interested in. Now we have Juuls, we have the before and after. So Juul, for the most part, is the product that came into the market in 2015. They are responsible for pretty much creating an epidemic of youth initiation. They are responsible for or helping get a whole new generation of young people addicted to nicotine because of the fact that they introduce a new form of nicotine liquid. They were controlling about 85% of the market at one point. Right now, they're just trying to survive. They were sued and they settled with 34 states. I think it was September. They agreed to pay $440 million to these 34 states because of their marketing practices, where they actually were found to, there was plenty of evidence that showed they were actually marketing their products to young people, to teenagers, using social media influencers, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, all those different platforms, and it worked because back in 2017, 2018, there was not a young person that did not know what a Juul was, whether they were using it or not. One of the main problems and one of the issues that we're having as far as the Juuls are concerned is the impact they have on dependence. Because of the type of liquid that they use is a much more concentrated form of nicotine. You're actually able to create a dependence to the substance at a much faster rate. A single pod can contain anywhere, it can contain up to 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine that is absorbed by the brain. So these young people were going from 0 cigarettes to, in essence, smoking a pack a day within a very short period of time. And that's why you had a lot of people concerned with, in terms of the school districts, the Department of Health, individuals at the state level concerned that this is something that we need to address. And I'm proud to say that I am part of a great group of people that work together to develop a program to address dependence with youth. And we're talking about 13 to 18-year-olds, okay? Forget about the whole notion of prevention. We're way past that. We have to actually help young people eliminate and control and move away from these products. They are really causing it's a very severe problem. Again, because of nicotine salts, the type of nicotine, it allows for a higher concentration of nicotine compared to the first generation or second generation products. And these are just some of the examples of the products that are available. So these are some of the examples of the products that are available in the market that were designed to use what Juul created, which was nicotine salts. And this is a whole new set of products that are available. Now, as far as nicotine salts are concerned, one of the main things that happened was that, and it sounds like I'm promoting the products, and I'm not, but they offer a much smoother experience when it comes to utilizing. So it's much more appealing for young people or for people that are not, tobacco users. It gives much more of a consistent delivery of nicotine at a much lower temperature. And this is very, very important to understand. And that's why, they became so popular among youth, because they were able to utilize it in the classroom, in the hallway. Because of the low temperature, the liquid doesn't have to be heat up to a high degree, therefore not creating much of a cloud or even a smell, so they can go undetected much easier. That's why you have a lot of parents that were calling the health department, the school, saying, I don't know what's going on. My kid is having trouble with these things. They were not even aware that there was nicotine in this product. So therefore, all of a sudden, you have a high rate of dependence with kids that never would have touched a cigarette. Now, this graph here pretty much indicates what happened, again, before and after Juul. If you look at the chart here, the blue line there at the bottom, this is what you would normally get as far as a spike or nicotine concentration in the system from utilizing a first generation, second generation electronic device. So as you can see, the concentration was very low, and it would actually dissipate over 30-minute period of time. When you look at the orange line, this is what the amount of nicotine that you get from a cigarette, combustible cigarette, regular cigarette. You get this high spike of nicotine in your system, and then it gradually reduces over time. PAX Labs, now known as Juul Labs, actually managed to figure out a way to create a concentration of nicotine in the system that mimics pretty closely what a cigarette does for the body. Okay, so you can see how we went from barely any nicotine in these products, not being very appealing, not very consistent, to a very consistent delivery device that obviously caused a major problem in terms of dependence. And then you started seeing a lot of marketing because companies realized, okay, I see what Juul is doing. All of a sudden, all these companies started coming up with their own liquids, their own nicotine salts, and there's a variety of different types of devices and flavors and types of liquids that were coming out. And you can see here, want to quit smoking cigarettes, try vaping, but it didn't work out. Want to start vaping, but you don't know where to start because devices seem too high tech. This is referring to the mods because the mods were the only product in the market that were actually very consistent in delivering nicotine. But like I said, they're very sophisticated, very expensive, much more advanced. So young people were not really going to turn to those. And you're looking for higher nicotine levels and throat hit that rivals experience of smoking cigarettes. Turn to nicotine salts. So this is kind of what we started seeing. Some of the concerns, and obviously now, again, we can see that this is what is happening. Youth initiation, highly addictive because of the high concentration of nicotine in these devices. Impact of benzoic acid because Juul figured that what they did was they added benzoic acid to the free base or the typical nicotine liquid that you would find in the market, and that's how they develop nicotine salts. Again, the issue of people not quitting, the nicotine concentration, and also the lack of regulation. And like I mentioned before, nicotine flux, and again, that's the rate that an e-cigarette emits nicotine. How fast does this device evaporate the nicotine so that the person can get the hit that they want? Some of the troubles that Juuls are finding themselves in as we speak, they were actually denied authorization to market their products by the FDA on June 23rd. Unfortunately, and again, not surprisingly, we talk about companies that have a lot of money, that have large teams of lawyers that will fight as needed. On June 24th, the day after the U.S. Court of Appeals wanted to restrict this ruling because they wanted to review the decision that was made by the FDA. So on July 5th, sure enough, the FDA backed down and said, okay, at this point you can still sell the product even though we're not authorizing it. And there's thousands of products just like Juul right now that are allowed to be sold in the United States that should not be allowed to be in the market. As I mentioned before, there was a settlement on September 6th that involved 34 states. And this is after 2-year investigation specifically on the marketing and sales practices by Juul to youth, okay? Juul were actually rated back in 2000, I believe it was 2019, 2018, they were rated by the FDA, and the FDA managed to get hundreds of documents that showed their marketing practices that were specifically targeting young people, okay? So as a result, they had to settle. There's other lawsuits that are still pending from independent organizations, from individuals. So at this point, Juul is just trying to stay afloat. Just yesterday, there was an article that I read where 2 of their main investors, going back to the beginnings of this company back in 2015, are trying to figure out a way to provide a bailout so that they can pay off all these different debts and manage to save the company. It wouldn't be surprising if the company goes under and then just comes back as something else. Now, because of the fact that there's some regulation and things in place for nicotine salts, and because companies have had the time to, again, be 10 steps ahead of us, they have pivoted and they started offering products with synthetic nicotine. These are some of the products that are available in the market currently. And as you can see, it says very clearly, because they're not allowed to sell products with tobacco derived nicotine, this product contains tobacco-free nicotine. So it's synthetic nicotine that is available in this different products. And this is just the beginning, okay? There is some language that was introduced to the guidelines they have in place to start trying to ban synthetic nicotine, but that's going to take some time. In the meantime, you already have something like puff bars that is a disposable electronic device that actually is using electronic synthetic nicotine. And this one actually became very, very popular once Juul was banned from selling some of their flavors. Some of the other disposable products that are available in the market, again, I'm not promoting these products. I'm simply just highlighting the availability of these devices. Very popular among youth and also just individuals that maybe switch from cigarettes to electronic devices, because synthetic nicotine is very effective and very consistent, and this device is much more sophisticated than previous products. It's not unlikely to see former smokers using these devices. And again, some of these other articles in terms of the synthetic nicotine unregulated and increasingly popular. Synthetic nicotine has arrived, and then some of the other information in terms of what is happening currently. So in summary, cessation efforts have been impacted by the availability of new delivery devices. Smokeless does not mean safer. Safer does not mean harmless. It's very, very important to point that out and to understand that. We're not supposed to put anything in our lungs other than pure breathable air. Anything else is going to cause harm. At what degree or what level? Unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until we have the data in front of us, but everything is pointing that it is a problem. It's not water vapor, but rather a chemical aerosol. Long-term impacts are yet to be determined, with evidence supporting the need for regulation in all fronts. Electronic cigarettes are products that impact initiation as well as cessation efforts. Any questions?
Mr. Rangel, I'd just like to thank you. I didn't get a chance to speak earlier. I'm Dr. Deborah Weiss. I'm co-chair of the Florida Asthma Coalition and of the Home Visiting Work Group. I'm a health educator and a professor, and I began my academic career in 1997 after working with at-risk youth for a number of years, including founding a prevention program that offered free and engaging programs to keep middle school age kids off the streets, away from nicotine, alcohol, and so forth. There were a number of, I worked with a coalition of youth agencies. I have run my own nonprofit, and it was very effective. And you know what happened after 11 years? They pulled the plug on the funding because they thought it was over, and soon we're back on the streets, doing drugs. So it is an ongoing effort, and the tobacco companies have huge clout, and they're always finding creative ways of getting around the regs. So thank you so much for your persistent and wonderful work in this area, and let's stay in touch about it and see if we can all help people to stay tobacco free. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But you are right. Unfortunately, these products, once they arrive in the market, and the fact that we, it's very frustrating, because to be honest, we tend to be reactive rather than being proactive. And I think the evidence was there early on that if we would have take more swift steps to put an end to this, we wouldn't have the problem in our hands that we have now. And it is very concerning, because I don't see an end anytime soon. We're talking about a very, very powerful industry that has the ability to impact individuals at higher levels. And unfortunately, our youth are the ones that are going to be paying the price for it. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
I'm going to have to say goodbye, because I'm giving a presentation at 1 to my academic group. We changed this meeting from last month. Thank you so much. Yes. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Hi, Dr. Weiss. Thank you. And it looks like we have a couple more minutes. So if anyone has any questions for Mr. Rangel, you can drop it in the chat and we can monitor accordingly. It looks like Marlene said, great nicotine presentation with simplicity too. So thank you. Thank you, Marlene, for that comment.
That's always my goal. I've been in this field, and a lot of times what I find is that people like to use certain terminology and certain wording that just kind of makes it not as impactful, if you will. Not to say that I'm a perfect presenter, but I always try to make things as simple and as straightforward as possible to get the message so that people can understand what it is that we're dealing with. So I appreciate that, Marlene. I see that you noticed that.
Yes, and it looks like George as well said thank you. So thank you, George, for the connection as well and introducing.
He's biased.
And one of the things, Mr. Rangel, is, and we mentioned this before in a pre-meeting that we had yesterday, that it's this is causing so much damage to the lungs. People just don't have any idea. And I'm looking at a article from the Chest Journal that it was presented just a few days ago. And the CDC and the National Institute of Health report that there's 2,800 cases of what they call it e-cigarette or vaping associated lung illness. And one of them, the most fatal, is the diffuse alveolar hemorrhage, where basically your lungs just bleed and bleed and bleed. And out of these almost 2,900 cases identified, there has been 68 fatalities. And so it's just not the popcorn lung like we heard almost at the beginning of the pandemic, when people just, I guess, started vaping even more. But it goes from all ages. This is not a youth problem. I mean, we need to kind of stop before they get even more addicted. But it's fatal. It's fatal. Yeah. We just have to convey that this can kill you, even if you try to help yourself.
Yeah, and one of the things that I tried to point out is the fact that, you know, our bodies are very resilient. And one of the things that we know, for example, with smoking, usually it takes a very long time for someone to start showing signs of deterioration. And I'm talking about years and years for the most part. You talk about someone would have, you know, again, there's differences in people and things, but for the most part, someone would have to smoke 25, 30 years. You know, conventional cigarette products to start showing the signs of deterioration that we're starting to see with electronic device use in a much shorter period of time. So we really have to figure out, like, why is that? And if that's the case, then we have a serious problem coming our way, because again, people don't realize that there is harm being done, because they think, oh, it's just water vapor, it's nothing, it's not cigarettes. You know, we have done a tremendous job in terms of educating people and educating individuals, society in general, that, you know, cigarettes are not good for you. And so we have that part in our favor, but now we need to, like you mentioned, we have to be more direct, and thankfully and unfortunately, the data is going to start coming, that is going to start displaying all these different things that unfortunately for some, it might be too late.
Yes, another option that I used to tell my middle school students a few years ago when I was a teacher. The FDA does not regulate this nicotine products, and you have no idea what's in there. I mean, I just put it in simple terms to 7th graders. I said, you can be vaping dry monkey poop with banana flavor.
Right.
That's it. I mean, you have no idea what's in there. It's not regulated. We know what's in tobacco, but we don't know what ingredients that they're putting in this liquids that, you know, that they're vaping. So yeah, just have to sometimes just get to their level and you know, and education, and just let them know what things that there are there that they're not, they might not think it's gonna damage that, like you've been saying, oh, it's just water, it's just water. Right. No, it's just not simply water.
They have to hear somebody pushing back. They have to hear somebody pushing back against the narrative that these products are safe and that there's nothing wrong with them. And until we get to the point where we unite and we work together, like we did with tobacco products, you know, things are just, are unfortunately not going to improve at the rate that they should.
Okay, well, we have just a couple minutes, and also before we go, and I thank you everybody for attending this Lunch and Learn webinar from the Home Visiting Work Group. So Dr. Weiss and myself, we thank you everyone for coming. There will be an evaluation coming from Dr. Zan Nowakowski. And also, if you are interested in chest credits, there's a link that the Health Council of Southeast Florida staff provided, so you can obtain that. And again, Mr. Eliseo Rangel, muchas gracias. Thank you very, very much for your presentation. Very informative. Please tune for next year. We will come back with the Lunch and Learn webinars. February, it seems like it's going to be one of our partners from the Florida Asthma Coalition, and we probably will be talking about managing asthma and the communication and the partnership between yourself, the family, and your physician. So stay tuned, more information will come. And lastly, a shout out to all respiratory therapists on this Respiratory Therapy Week. I'm very biased because I'm one of them, but congratulations, you do an amazing job. And everybody, so we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much. I just wanted to know, quick question. Will this be also available in Spanish?
We might have to ask Mr. Rangel, you know, where he is actually bilingual. So
Correct.
yeah, so yeah, that's something that we, you know, that for me also as a bilingual person is always a must to provide this. So, but I'm pretty sure that he can do the translations and put it out there. And I think probably will be Shelby and Caitlin, and will be probably the first Spanish version of the Lunch and Learn. So we will ask Mr. Rangel and you know, find out. But thank you for the suggestion, Sol.
Yes, I say so just because, you know, this information is great for us, but mostly I'm thinking of the parents. And as we share the information with community partners, school, you know, leaders, the way I'm thinking it, even in the library, you know, forward everything, it's always good to have it in both languages, because, you know, the way I process things, Spanish is one of my, you know, strong languages, and I just think about my population. So yeah.
Yes, I totally understand, Sol, because, you know, like I said, I'm one of them.
Well,
Anybody
thank you
else
so
have?
much.
Oh, you're
Yes.
welcome. You're welcome. So anybody else have a question or anything like that, a comment, just, you know, let us know, communicate with us at Florida. It's FL Asthma Coalition at gmail.com.
Yes, I can drop it in the chat for everyone.
Okay.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you all for attending.